Listen to me very carefully, President Museveni, because what I'm about to say comes from a place of deep concern for the people of Uganda, the same people you claim to serve. On December 30th, 2025, your security forces, both police and military personnel, surrounded the home of Dr. Sarah Barita in Kampala. Before they took her, she managed to send one message to the world: "My house is under siege by police and army." Those were her last words before disappearing into your system. And now, as I speak, she sits in Luzira prison, denied bail, charged with what you call unlawful disclosure of voter data. But we both know what this really is. This is intimidation. This is suppression. This is the desperate act of a regime that fears the truth more than it fears anything else. Dr. Sarah Barita is not a criminal. She is a constitutional lawyer, a human rights defender, the executive director of the Center for Constitutional Governance. She is the chairperson of the East and Horn of Africa Election Observation Network, representing 8 countries in our region. She serves on the global network of domestic election monitors. This woman has dedicated her entire professional life to protecting democracy, to defending the rule of law, to ensuring that elections have integrity. And for this, you have thrown her in prison. For this, you have made her an enemy of the state. Let me ask you something, Museveni. What are you so afraid of? What threat does this one woman pose to your 40 years of power that you need both police and army to arrest her? The charges are laughable if they weren't so tragic. They claim she unlawfully obtained or disclosed National Voters Register information between January and December of this year, information that belongs to the Electoral Commission. They say she did this without authorization, without consent. But here's what they won't tell you. Dr. Bariti's entire job, her entire mission, has been to monitor elections, to observe electoral processes, to ensure transparency. That's what election observers do. They examine voter registers, they verify data, they check for irregularities, they ensure that citizens' rights are protected. This is not a crime, this is her constitutional duty. This is what democracy looks like when it's functioning properly. But you don't want democracy functioning properly, do you? You want elections that you control. You want data that you manipulate. You want observers who stay silent. And when someone like Dr. Sarah Barit refuses to stay silent, when she insists on transparency, when she demands accountability, you send your forces to her home in the middle of the night and drag her to prison. This is not governance. This is tyranny dressed in legal language. Let me tell you what really triggered this arrest, because the timing tells us everything we need to know. Just days before her detention, Dr. Barit posted something on social media that clearly rattled your administration. She wrote, "Dear Ugandans, are you thinking of ways to navigate internet shutdown during elections? Starlink got you covered." She encouraged Ugandans to consider satellite internet as protection against the internet blackouts your government has become infamous for imposing during elections. She said, and I quote her exact words, "Satellite internet can't be blocked by dictators. Liberate yourself." That's what this is really about, isn't it? She exposed your plan. She gave people a solution to your censorship. She showed Ugandans that your control isn't absolute, that technology exists beyond your reach, that citizens can find ways to communicate even when you try to silence them. And for speaking this truth, for offering this hope, you branded her a criminal. Your government, through the Uganda Communications Commission and the Uganda Revenue Authority, has been blocking Starlink equipment imports. You claim it's about licensing and regulatory approval. But we all know it's about control. It's about maintaining your ability to shut down the internet whenever the people start organizing, whenever opposition voices get too loud, whenever the truth threatens your narrative. In the elections of 2021, your regime shut down Uganda's internet for 5 entire days. 5 days of darkness. 5 days where Ugandans couldn't communicate with each other, couldn't share information, couldn't document what was happening in their country. The international community condemned this as a violation of freedom of expression and access to information. But you didn't care then, and you don't care now. Dr. Barit simply reminded Ugandans that there are technologies you cannot control, and this terrified you enough to send security forces to her home. Now she sits in Luzira prison until January 21st, 2026. The magistrate entered a plea of not guilty on her behalf because Dr. Barita herself declared not true. She denied your manufactured charges. Her lawyers applied for bail, even presented medical evidence that she suffers from hypertension, that keeping her in prison poses serious health risks. But the prosecution said they needed time to respond. Time to respond to what? Time to fabricate more evidence. Time to coordinate more charges. Time to break her spirit. The law you're using against her, Section 35 of the Data Protection and Privacy Act, carries a potential sentence of 10 years in prison. 10 years for a human rights lawyer who dedicated her life to protecting Ugandans' constitutional rights. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so devastating. You're using data protection laws to punish someone who was protecting voters' rights to fair elections. You're weaponizing privacy legislation against someone who was ensuring electoral transparency. Let me remind you of something, Museveni. Dr. Berita's arrest violates your own constitution. Article 23, subsection 3, requires that an arrested person be informed immediately of the reasons for their arrest and their right to legal counsel. When your forces took her on December 30th, neither she nor her lawyers were told what charges she would face. They held her for days before bringing her to court. Article 28 of your constitution guarantees the presumption of innocence and the right to a fair and speedy hearing. But you've denied her bail, thrown her in prison, and scheduled her next hearing 3 weeks away. Is this your idea of speedy justice? Uganda is also a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Articles 9, 10, and 11 protect against arbitrary detention, guarantee fair trial rights, and uphold the presumption of innocence. You've violated all of these. The East African Community Treaty, which Uganda signed, commits member states to democracy, good governance, and respect for human rights. But these are just words on paper to you, aren't they? Convenient when they serve your interests, irrelevant when they constrain your power. The Eastern Horn of Africa Election Observation Network issued a statement from Nairobi expressing deep concern over Dr. Beriti's detention. They pointed out the constitutional violations. They reminded your government of its international obligations, but you don't listen to civil society. You don't respond to reasoned arguments. You only understand one language, the language of power, and that's the language I'm speaking to you now. This arrest isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a clear pattern, a systematic campaign of intimidation as Uganda approaches the January 15th, 2026 general elections. You're not even hiding it anymore. Opposition leader Robert Kyagulanyi, Bobi Wine, said it plainly. Every election cycle, the regime targets civil society leaders, journalists, and human rights activists. This is your playbook. This is how you maintain control, create fear, silence dissent. Arrest anyone who might observe too closely, who might document your irregularities, who might tell the truth about what happens at polling stations. Political analyst Jim Spire-Santongo asked the right question. It means anyone can be picked up anytime. That's exactly the point, isn't it? That's the message you're sending to every Ugandan who might consider standing up, speaking out, demanding their rights. You're telling them, look what happens to educated lawyers with international connections. Look what happens to respected civil society leaders. Look what happens to election observers. If we can do this to Dr. Sarah Berita, we can do it to anyone. Timothy Mzobor Chimonges, Executive Director at the Center for Policy Analysis, said something profound. A democracy is measured by how it treats those who question it. By this measure, Museveni, Uganda under your leadership is not a democracy. It's an autocracy wrapped in democratic rhetoric. You hold elections, yes, but you imprison the observers. You have a constitution, yes, but you violate it whenever convenient. You claim to respect human rights, yes, but you send armed forces to arrest lawyers in their homes. Dr. Beriti has been a vocal critic of what she correctly identifies as the increasing militarization of civic space in Uganda. She has consistently raised concerns about security forces' involvement in political processes. She has warned about the militarization of elections. And now you've proved her point more dramatically than she ever could. You sent both police and military to arrest one lawyer, police and military. For a woman whose weapon is her legal expertise, whose threat is her commitment to constitutional governance, this is the perfect illustration of everything she's been warning about. The world is watching this, Museveni. The international community is paying attention. The East African community is observing. Global election monitoring networks are taking note. You may control what happens inside Uganda's borders. You may control your courts and your police and your military, but you cannot control the world's perception of what you're doing. And what the world sees is a regime so insecure, so fragile, so terrified of scrutiny that it imprisons election observers before elections even happen. You've been in power for 40 years. 40 years. I was born after you took office. Most of Uganda's population wasn't alive when you came to power. You've had 4 decades to build a system strong enough, legitimate enough, transparent enough that it doesn't need to fear observers. But instead you've built a system so corrupt, so rigged, so dependent on coercion, that it cannot survive honest observation. That's why Dr. Beriti is in prison. Not because she broke the law, but because she might expose how thoroughly you've broken democracy. Let me tell you something about leadership, about real leadership. A leader who believes in his mandate doesn't fear scrutiny. A leader who trusts his people doesn't need to silence critics. A leader who has legitimacy doesn't require armies to arrest lawyers. True power doesn't need to imprison observers because true power has nothing to hide. But you hide everything, don't you? You hide voter data. You hide election irregularities. You hide the truth about disappearances, about torture, about the systemic violations that Dr. Beriti and others like her work to expose. Here in Burkina Faso, we understand something fundamental. Sovereignty belongs to the people, Not to one man, not to one party, not to the military, to the people. And the people have the